In the summer of 1921, on the banks of the Volga, people begin eating the dead. 5 million will starve in 18 months. Relief workers arrive from America and find whole villages sitting silent in the sun, waiting. They report families killing and eating their own. This is not a medieval famine. This is 4 years after a revolution fought in the name of bread. The men who now rule Russia came to power promising 3 things: peace, land, bread. By the time the Volga empties, they have delivered a war, a seizure, and this. For 300 years, Russia is ruled by one family. The Tsar owns the land, the law, the army, and the church, and answers to no one on earth. 80 out of every 100 Russians are peasants, and most of them cannot read. A country the size of a continent is run by a single man, and that man is not equal to it. And then, in 8 years, all of it is gone. It does not fall in one night. It falls in stages, and each stage makes the next one certain. A crowd walks to the palace to beg the Tsar for help, and he has them shot. A war is entered that the country cannot supply, and 1/3 of its soldiers are sent to fight without a rifle. The railways break, and the bread stops reaching the cities. Women in a bread queue start a revolution nobody planned. The Tsar falls in 4 days, and the men who replace him keep the war that killed him. And a man arrives at a railway station in Petrograd with one promise nobody else will make. This is the Russian Revolution. So, let us start from the beginning. It begins on a Sunday morning in January 1905, outside the Winter Palace. 150,000 people are walking through the snow toward it. They are not armed. They carry icons, crosses, and portraits of the Tsar himself. At the front walks a priest named Georgy Gapon, holding a petition. The petition asks for an 8-hour day, a fair wage, and the right to elect representatives. It is addressed to Nicholas II, and it calls him Father, because that is what he is supposed to be. For 3 centuries, the Tsar has been taught to his people as the little father, placed on the throne by God to protect them. The peasants believe that if the Tsar only knew how they lived, he would act. So they are not marching against him. They are marching to him. They have reason to be desperate. 40 years earlier, 23 million serfs were freed, and given land they had to pay for over 49 years. Most of them are still paying. The countryside is starving for land, and the population is growing faster than the fields can feed it. So they go where the work is, into the new factories of Petersburg and Moscow. Russia industrializes late and fast, and by 1900, it has some of the largest factories in the world. 12-hour days, no unions, no right to strike, company barracks with families sleeping in shifts. And for the first time in Russian history, the poor are gathered in one place, in their thousands, able to hear one another. That is the fact that makes everything else in this story possible. The soldiers guarding the palace open fire on the crowd. They fire on people carrying pictures of the man they are marching to see. The official count is 96 dead. Eyewitnesses say several hundred. Some accounts say more than 1,000, and the true number has never been established. Nicholas is not even in the city. That night he writes in his diary that there were serious disturbances, that many were killed and wounded, and that it is painful and sad. On the same page he records that his mother came to visit, that they had breakfast together, and that he went for a walk. The killing does not frighten Russia into silence. It ends something instead. The idea of the Tsar as protector, 300 years old, dies in the snow outside his own palace that morning. Within weeks, the country is on fire. Strikes spread from city to city. Then, A general strike stops the railways and the newspapers and the electricity. Peasants burn manor houses across the countryside. The crew of the battleship Potemkin mutinies and turns its guns on Odessa. And in the factories, the workers do something nobody has seen before. They elect councils to speak for them, and they call these councils Soviets. Remember that word. By October, Nicholas is losing the country, and he does the only thing left. He signs a manifesto promising civil liberties and an elected parliament, the Duma. The middle classes accept it, the coalition splits, and the revolution collapses. And then, having survived, he takes it back. He dissolves the first Duma in 73 days. He dissolves the second in 3 months. Then he rewrites the voting laws so that a landowner's vote is worth that of 500 peasants. 1905 ends with the autocracy intact, and with one lesson learned by everybody. The Tsar can be forced to concede, and the Tsar cannot be trusted to keep it. What follows is not reform, but rot. The heir to the throne, Alexei, is a haemophiliac, and the illness is kept a state secret. A Siberian peasant named Rasputin can stop the boy's bleeding when the doctors cannot, and so he is admitted to the imperial family. He is filthy, he is a drunk, and he is soon the most talked about man in Russia. By 1916, the aristocracy believe he is choosing ministers. Whether he truly is, historians still dispute. What is certain is that the court is now a joke to its own nobility, and that Tsar has lost the last people who would have defended him. In December, a group of aristocrats murder Rasputin in a cellar in Petrograd. They believe they are saving the monarchy. They have 2 months left. And the thing that will end it has already been running for 2 years, 500 miles to the west. The thing running 500 miles to the west is the war. In August 1914, Russia enters the First World War, and it enters to cheering. Crowds kneel in the square outside the Winter Palace and sing to the Tsar. St. Petersburg is renamed Petrograd because the old name sounds German. For a few weeks, the country is united behind him for the first time in 20 years. It lasts 1 summer. Russia has the largest army on earth and cannot arm it. By December 1914, it has 6.5 million men and 4.5 million rifles. Headquarters asks for 100,000 new rifles a month. Russian factories can make 42,000. General Brusilov writes that in recent battles, 1/3 of his men had no weapon at all and had to wait behind the front rank until their comrades were killed in front of them so they could pick up the rifle. The army, he writes, is drowning in its own blood. There is roughly 1 surgeon for every 10,000 men, spread along a front 500 miles long. For a wounded Russian soldier, the chance of seeing a doctor is close to none. The defeats come fast. Tannenberg, the Masurian Lakes, then the Great Retreat of 1915 out of Poland and Galicia. By the autumn of that year, 800,000 Russian soldiers are dead and no ground has been gained. And then Nicholas makes the decision that finishes him. He goes to the front and takes personal command of the army. His generals beg him not to. His only military experience is cavalry training. From that moment, every defeat belongs to him by name, and it leaves the government in Petrograd in the hands of his wife, a German-born empress, advised by Rasputin. While the army bleeds, the country behind it stops working. 15 million men are pulled off the land into uniform, and the harvest is brought in by women and children. The railways are handed over to the army, and the grain has no way to travel. There is food in Russia. There is simply no way to move it to the people who need it. Moscow needs 120 freight cars of grain a day, and by the start of 1917, It is receiving 1/6 of that. Coal cannot reach the factories, so the factories close. It cannot reach the bakeries either, so bread cannot be baked even when there is flour. Prices quadruple while wages stay where they were in 1914. And the winter of 1916 is one of the coldest on record. In February 1917, the city is at the end of it. On the 18th, workers at the Putilov engineering works demand higher wages, and 20,000 of them are locked out. On the 19th, the government announces bread rationing and the city panics and empties the shops. On the 23rd, it is International Women's Day, and the women standing in the bread queues stop waiting. They walk out of the queues and into the streets, and they call the factory workers out with them. Nobody planned this. No party called it. Within 2 days, 200,000 people are on the streets of Petrograd, and by the 25th, the city has stopped. The Tsar at the front orders the garrison to fire on the crowds. On the 26th, they do, and dozens are killed. The next morning, the soldiers refuse. These are not career troops. They are peasants and workers in uniform, recently conscripted, standing in front of people exactly like themselves. Regiment after regiment mutinies, shoots its own officers, and joins the crowd. By the evening of the 27th, the garrison of the capital belongs to the revolution. The Tsar has no army in his own city. He tries to return to Petrograd, and his train is turned back. On the 2nd of March, in a railway carriage at Pskov, Nicholas II signs away the throne. He abdicates for himself and for his son, and the brother he names refuses it the next day. 304 years of Romanov rule ends in a railway siding in under a week with no battle. That night he writes in his diary that he left Pskov with a heavy feeling of what he had lived through, and that all around him is treason and cowardice and deceit. Then he records the time of departure and the weather. The autocracy is gone and nobody agreed what replaces it. 2 bodies step into the empty space at the same hour. In one wing of the Taurid Palace, the Duma forms a provisional government of liberals and lawyers. In another wing of the same building, the workers and soldiers reform their council from 1905, the Petrograd Soviet. One of them has the legal authority. The other has the factories, the railways, and the guns. Neither can rule without the other, and neither will submit to it. Russia now has 2 governments in one building and 8 months to discover which of them the country will obey. The country will obey whoever ends the war, and the provisional government will not. It is the one decision that destroys them. They believe Russia must honor its allies and fight on. But the war is what broke the bread supply, what emptied the fields, what put the soldiers in the streets in February. Every reason the Tsar fell is still true the week after he falls. The new government inherits his war, and with it, his ending. In April, a sealed train crosses Germany carrying a man the Germans want inside Russia. Vladimir Lenin has been in exile for 17 years, and the Germans calculate that he will pull Russia out of the war. They are right, and it will cost them nothing. He arrives at the Finland station in Petrograd and refuses to congratulate anybody. The next day, he publishes 10 short demands that split his own party. No support for the provisional government. No continuation of the war. All power to the Soviets. His own Bolsheviks think he has lost his mind. Within a month, he has won the argument, and the Bolsheviks become the only party in Russia demanding an immediate end to the war. Through the summer, the government does everything wrong. It launches a new offensive in June, and it collapses within weeks. Soldiers begin deserting in hundreds of thousands and walking home to seize land. In July, armed workers and sailors pour into Petrograd, demanding the Soviets take power, and the rising fails. The government moves hard. Bolshevik newspapers are shut. Hundreds are arrested. Trotsky is imprisoned, and Lenin shaves his beard and flees to Finland, disguised as a railway worker. In July 1917, the Bolsheviks are finished. They are a banned party with its leader in hiding. They will be in power in 14 weeks. What saves them is a general. In August, the commander-in-chief, Lava Kornilov, decides the government is too weak and marches troops on Petrograd to crush the Soviets and restore order. Kerensky, now head of the government, has no army loyal enough to stop him. So he turns to the only force in the city that can fight. He releases the imprisoned Bolsheviks and hands out rifles to the workers' militia, the Red Guards. Kornilov never reaches the capital. Railway workers tear up the track in front of his trains, and his own soldiers refuse to advance. The coup dissolves without a shot, and the Bolsheviks are now legal, armed, and proven to be the men who defended the city. The guns are never handed back. From that moment, the collapse is measured in weeks. In September, the Bolsheviks win a majority in the Petrograd Soviet, and then in Moscow. Trotsky is released from prison and elected its chairman. He creates a military revolutionary committee, and quietly, unit by unit, the garrison of Petrograd stops taking orders from the government. By late October, the government still holds the buildings and no longer holds the men inside them. On the night of the 24th of October, it takes almost nothing. Red Guards and soldiers walk into the telegraph office, the post office, the railway stations, the power station, and the bridges, and take them. There is little fighting because there is almost nobody willing to fight for the government. The following night, they enter the Winter Palace, where the ministers are still sitting, and arrest them. Kerensky has already left the city looking for troops that do not exist. The seizure of power that changed the 20th century costs a handful of lives. Lenin announces that the new government will give the people peace, land, and bread. 2 months later, Russia votes. The Constituent Assembly is the free election the whole revolution had been demanding since 1895, and the Bolsheviks lose it. They take under a quarter of the seats. The assembly meets in January 1918 and sits for a single day. That night, the guards are ordered to close the building and it never meets again. The last election in Russia for 73 years is over in 13 hours. Everything that follows is decided by force, and the country is about to be torn in half over it. The country tears in half over the peace. In March 1918, Lenin signs the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and takes Russia out of the war. He keeps his promise, and the price is a third of the empire's population, most of its coal and half its industry, handed to Germany in a single signature. For his enemies, this is proof of treason. Officers, landowners, liberals, monarchists, and rival socialists take up arms against him, and the civil war begins. 14 foreign countries send troops. The Reds hold the center, the cities, the railways, and the factories. The Whites hold the edges and agree on nothing except who they are against. To win, the Bolsheviks build the thing they overthrew. Trotsky raises a Red Army of 5 million, conscripted, with former Tsarist officers commanding and their families held hostage against their loyalty. Under war communism, all industry is nationalized, all strikes banned, and armed detachments are sent into the villages to seize grain. Not surplus grain, all of it, including the seed for next year's planting. In September 1918, the government proclaims the Red Terror. The Cheka is given the power to arrest, try and shoot without a court, and hostages are executed by the hundred. In July, in a cellar in Yekaterinburg, the Tsar, his wife, their 4 daughters, and their 13-year-old son are shot with their doctor and 3 servants. The house is called the Ipatiev House. 300 years earlier, the first Romanov had accepted the throne at a monastery of the same name. By 1921, the Reds have won, and the country is destroyed. Industrial output stands at 1/5 of pre-war levels. Then the rain fails, the harvest collapses on land already stripped of its seed, and famine takes the Volga. 5 million die, and that number is disputed by historians to this day. American relief workers arrive and end up feeding 10 million people a day, and the government never publicly acknowledges their help. The regime that promised bread has produced the worst famine in Russian history. And in March, the men who made the revolution rise against it. The sailors of Kronstadt were the pride of 1917, the men Trotsky himself had called the glory of the revolution. In 1921, they demand free elections, free speech, and an end to the grain seizures. Soviets without communists, they call it. The Red Army is sent across the ice to destroy them. Thousands are killed and the survivors are shot or driven into Finland. Within weeks, Lenin quietly abandons grain requisitioning and legalizes small private trade. He gives the peasants what Kronstadt asked for, after killing the men who asked. In 1922, what remains is named the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Lenin is already dying. Within 5 years, Stalin holds the party, and within 15, most of the men who stood beside Lenin in 1917 have been shot as traitors by the state they built. Trotsky is exiled, hunted, and killed in Mexico with an ice axe. The revolution eats every one of them. A crowd walked to a palace in 1905 carrying pictures of the Tsar and asked for bread and a voice. They were shot. 16 years later, the government that came out of that morning was seizing the last grain out of the same villages. Every promise was kept and broken at once. Peace came and cost an empire. Land came and was taken back. Bread was promised by men who would preside over a famine of 5 million. They did not set out to build any of this. They thought they were feeding the hungry. They were not the first to look at a world that everyone had accepted and refused to accept it. Every revolution in this story began the same way. Someone looked at a problem the world had accepted and refused to accept it. That is what this channel is about. Not dates, not names to memorize. The moments when everything changed and the people who paid for it. A century earlier, another country had already learned that the machine could feed a nation or starve it. Britain built the factory, the clock, and the working day, and the world has run on them ever since. That story is already waiting for you. There are more of these coming. If you want to be there when the next one arrives, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It is the only way you will know. I'll see you at the next revolution.